Silent crickets, isn't it? Discontinuing, isn't it? From the new broadcast center, you are now behind the woodshed. That's right, the new one. Such that it is. This will be BTWRLM 218. Okay, the broadcast center is a free desk I got out of Craigslist, and I modified it a bit, so. Resituated. Now, the cooler part is the new broadcast center is now located in new digs behind the woodshed. And it all has been changed. We was able to change it all out in a day. And so I hope everything's going out okay. I think everything's looking good. Took a lot of help with friends to make it all work out for me, but here we are. I hope. I'm looking. I even have a new free monitor from Craigslist as the other one went out. This one's going to go out too, but that's the way this works on a shoestring. There's a lot of work to move this thing around and get it all done, but about beat me to death. What a job. I'm still working out some of the bugs, but we have a lot more room. We got everything all set up, but we actually now have a kitchen table I can eat on. The last one was covered by all the computer stuff to do this. This place is now so much bigger, it's just thinking about it. I almost have to pack a lunch to go between the kitchen and the bedroom, and I have to use a map, and I bring crumbs. But as I think about that, you crickets, you'd eat those crumbs just to get me lost for next week's broadcast, wouldn't you? Yeah, I know y'all. I think I'll use a compass instead then. So, what do we have going on this week in the notice? Thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. What did we have on the? I looked through the notice, the news. I looked through it, and I couldn't find nothing. I mean, literally nothing. As if the news actually stopped of anything new to put together for you all. And only that thought crossed my mind was to think, well, that's really all the notice really is. It has been. Just hoping that when I pull all this stuff together, that someone will be paying attention. I think we have, at least behind the woodshed, and those that I work with, we have an understanding what it's really about and local to you and how to resolve it. And it's still amazing to me how many people won't really, engage, just jump in. It's really just jump in. If you wait, as I was talking in the UCY chat, if I was to have waited for my feeling that my knowledge was good enough, we would have never been where we are today. There would have been no way to have it happen, and we wouldn't have engaged, and that enemy would have been so far down the road ahead of us that we also accelerated our learning and jumping in. And so I can't tell you enough how imperative it is find the wrong you want to make right and make sure that you be there to, at least, even acting as a speed bump is an amazing thing as well. I mean, I was real busy this week. In fact, I got to the broadcast and started wondering what else I had to do because my mind really wasn't into doing anything here, as far as focusing on, like throughout the week I'll do the broadcast while I've got all my projects running. I have a little window going and I just keep track of things. Didn't do any of that this week. So, this notice, I was thinking from last week, I don't know how many, I got no response from last week. And I'm handing you, essentially, the insight to destroy anything that we are dealing with in most instances. And didn't get much feedback on that you all hadn't thought about it, even if you hadn't thought about it, that it made sense that way, or that you thought about it and never saw it that way, or that I was off base or whatever. No responses whatsoever on that. And so I'm talking about the response of the content. Not that you're finding that it's essentially worthy content, but that you're using it. This is not about just hearing. I really don't know what to tell people. I have nothing to tell people. I'm only commenting on observations of what I see is against us. that is all, I say, beyond media. It's beyond opinion. I don't have to work out the bugs. It's been worked out for the essential fact of engaging these people that are destroying our lives, running us into a future that's just getting so creepy. We don't have to know how to analyze that. I think there's enough knowledge on that we just need to engage it, and you'll find quickly how to continue to engage it. And if you engage it the way I've been asking, there is no real jeopardy. Or not like the one you play in the RLM chat right before the broadcast. There's no real jeopardy. And it's kind of a pretty interesting thing to walk in. You have to change your attitude a little bit. You got to have a little different view of what's going on. Again, I think it's not the revolution. It's the evolution of our minds, of our insight. It's overcoming the oppression of our minds that has been programmed into us. And those that don't tune into this broadcast, those that come and go away really quickly, those that listen and then think they have a better attitude, or those that think they know and just have an argument with me, I don't think that all of y'all have not read quite enough. It's the answer's right in front of us to do, and the problem is not enough are actually doing on the doing. I think once we found out what the big deal is, put the priorities in the proper order, I think the answer is pretty clear on what needs to be done. Now, that comes in 10,000 different places. So it looks like there's so much things to do, but it's essentially dealing with the same underlying structure of subversion. It really has a pretty consistent core. I really haven't found how it's different. In fact, I'm going to be talking to somebody next week. He brings up a whole bunch of problems, and I looked at it and I said, well, this is just, we can analyze this pretty quickly and get to the nubbins of it. And we can start working there, not working with the effect. I'm not working with why my skin itches. I'm working with what's causing it to itch. And I bring that to every week. I'm just bringing those things that you can use and just jump in. And a lot of people won't. And that's our fallen nature as well. And that's, again, as I tell you, the protocols of the elders of Zion pretty much lined me in on somebody knows you better than you. They know me better than me, and it's up to me to still function and not be susceptible to the vulnerabilities. Create tools in me that give me at least one chance to observe the problem and avoid it. So with all the stuff that wasn't going on this week, this flood of information that's going on, that no one seems to be dealing with anyway, for the most part. And I only bring it as these new so-called news, whatever media you talk to is just bringing their view of the retelling of what they see printed out before. And I try to pull that together and say, okay, here's all the little bits and pieces that you can pull together that show there's an underlying consistency that can be addressed. And we're back to the addressment, the doing of it. And as I think that, I said, so there's nobody listening. There's only a handful listening. When I say nobody, we're talking in the general. Nobody comes behind the woodshed. Nobody would want to, right? And that's the big test. Will you come behind the woodshed and stick around? Will you learn the principles you need to learn? Will you leave behind the woodshed with the lesson learned and go out in the world and literally take responsibility? Don't leave it to anybody else. Because everything you leave to someone else is voluntarism. Everything. I was just listening to the Corbett broadcast with Freeman Fly, I think his name is what he uses, talking and responding in the context of anarchy without chaos. And that just responding to that question is an ignorance of the subject matter. And yet they expounded greatly on all about that. And ultimately it really helps nobody. But they ultimately get to the point where you gotta get local. So what can I say? I mean, you went through the brush and thrash and all this other stuff you didn't need to go through and started from the wrong premise, but you finally get closer to the better answer. But no one does even that. And even that's not enough either, because what the suggestion was, would not be and will not be allowed when you go to do that, because you haven't addressed those people that are already in the seats of decision to stop you and have made all the efforts and ordinances in that the real power will come to stop you. And none of you came behind the woodshed sufficiently to understand how you break that down when they do come against you, and they are organized. It can still be broken down. And I really listening around, I don't hear many broadcasts that will really break this down. Not at all. And no one gives you the tools. And I'm thinking, as I say that, I'm thinking, wow, it really is. It's pretty stark what's not out in the world for information that you actually need. And I'm sitting, I just started thinking, what is it? How am I in this place that I can see this? What is this? Why am I so special in that regard? Well, it's not really the specialty. It's where we were supposed to be and what we abandoned. What was beat down out of us. And they've really done a good job to all of us. It's pretty fascinating. I think main difference for me is I continually question whether or not the ideas I have are conditioned before I get started. And I was talking also at a minor district meeting this Friday, and I was going through that. It occurred to me that someone who's on their path of learning the basic foundation for this condition that we're under, and in particular to the usurpation by the Bar Association. It occurred to me, reading certain bills I was having them to go read because, they're writing the statutes to tell you that they've overthrown your states. I realized finally, I think he came to me, I think I sensed that he was going to be now finally going to read those after he hadn't been reading them for a while. I was asking him a long time ago to read them. I said, maybe he's going to do it this time. And it occurred to me, it wasn't just that I read that they had overthrown, because that's only in 5 sections. It wasn't just that I read that they overthrow your existence. What you call government's been overthrown. It's what they did, how I could identify it. And that required I had read the black and white of prior authorities. Not the internet. Went to the archives of the same so-called state, because now we're after the fact. I go down to the archives. And essentially archives mean it's put away for non-use. But anyway, it doesn't matter. You get to go see what's in there. And I had read enough, as I told you. My first set of books was the Benedict's on Admiralty. Got an eyeball for what Admiralty law, which is international law, is. To tell you that it's like there's no land in Admiralty, and you find it's funny that the statutes, as I was telling him, the penal statutes are sitting there in Admiralty. They are your state statutes, which means your states, so-called states, are operating under Admiralty principles. And you go, well, how is that? It's on the land. Well, there's a thing called booty. Booty is the land equivalent to prize. And prize is the taking of something in the ocean, a vessel, and for capture and for value at the instance of the sovereign. This is where we get to the privateers and things in the Constitution. So, why would the penal statutes of a land-based government be Admiralty? Is telling you that it's not really a land-based government. It's really not based in soil and land at all. And going through that, going back to the statute that show that you've been overthrown, you're now living in occupied territory and have been. How you have to come to that isn't just reading the bill that did it. You have to understand how they did it, and it occurred to me that I had to have a black and white in my eyes of what I had read before in order to appreciate what I was reading. And I had to explain to him, well, it's not just reading that. In fact, you may not even understand what they've done if you don't have the basics, but you'll see it's done. It's just you won't understand the totality of it, how it was done. There's a mechanics behind what happened. And so I then had to suggest, well, you're going to have to go read quite a few more sections of code, which were laws, state laws before they were statutes. And so there's a process here, and I'm just bringing you the thing that you can roll your sleeves up on. What I'm telling you what I just explained to you right there is the power that you'll get when you read There's no question, again, the lights came on for him when he read the passages in the statute sections that said that permanent law, essentially, paraphrased, the permanent laws of the people had been substituted for this, essentially the Model Business Corporation Act. You don't appreciate, I don't know of anybody that appreciates what that means until you see it and understands what, and actually then the mind triggers to figure out, well, that's a real thing that really happened. And how did they get that done? Well, that's the power of that foundation is in reading the black and white and coming to the conclusion to be able to appreciate what was done that overthrew your lives. Now, that's the one of them. And there's quite a few others. Foreign force comes in and overthrows our lives. And if you do it right under international law, if you legally do it, no one knows you've done it. And all the states had this happen back in about 1953 on the one level. And then we had another usurpation kind of creep in underneath the skin of that, on that authority, so-called. And the authority is the one that has the control. And so I'm not talking on the authorita where you start realizing, oh, these people, whoever these are, don't have authority. I'm talking, you don't know this. And they did it so well, they snuck up on you, and they started running things for you. And you had the duty not to do that, let them do that, and you forgot. And now this is so many years down the road, we don't even know what's happened. And in the meantime, underneath that failure of you, then they creeped in, they brought another creep in of another type of occupation. And this is the thing I was more talking about last week in reading the documentation from even the new, supposedly the helpful new agency head, and showing you that the words are all the same. If you know what you're looking at, the occupation's slapping you, staring you, and slapping you straight in the face. And so there's no need to go research, and at the point that you see that that's how they're doing you, taking you down, there's no need to go research more deeply. But the research, as you start to fight that, as you start to address it, you go do other research that supports how it got there. That's the research that you do, so that you can see how the mechanism works wherever you see it. You're not looking at the effect anymore. You're not looking at what you're fighting. That's the cause. That's the effect. You start understanding the underlying cause because you have to deal with it. Everything you do, they respond through their cause. That's the only way they can respond. It's a creature with bad habits, essentially, from our standpoint. And that creature with bad habits can be defeated because it works out of the habit. It works out of its method. It works out of its organic structure. So with all the news that didn't go on, that I looked around and couldn't really find anything, and at some point I've just had a cross thought as well, as maybe I'm not finding a whole lot because I don't see a whole lot of people taking advantage of what I'm producing. So maybe there's just not so interesting anymore. And maybe if it ever was. No, for those of us that participate and try to do something, I know it's really important. But the most bulk of everybody, it's probably not, which is going to be our demise as a people. And I've told you to look over back east, so everything I didn't see, one thing did pop up. And once I finish this, I'm just going to go back to my old tabs, and we're going to go, there's so much stuff I haven't talked about that I can keep bringing up. I'm just going to continue to go. But for this week, I think the most important thing I found, again, looking beyond our opinion of what we think we see in the world and seeing what's going on, and taking it from external sources, and you look at whether or not those sources are lying to you too. So you got to do a lot of thinking on how you prove it. What came through late yesterday to me was a breaking story. The Syrian army has reached the Iraqi border, cutting off Americans at al-Tanf. And so, what is this blood clot we deal with from the United States of America? But what's going on in Syria? What I told you, looking at the Middle East as a mirror for what's happening to you and how they go about taking you out, and the strategies that are going on, and the war against you. Another insight, and an insight as to who we're up against. And it's not just that we understand, oh, it's the government, and so they're no good. No, this, as I say, the government's a framework. It's something we've created. I explained, again, in the mining district that we were talking, I was explaining how this lays out in the context of the overthrow, and how they infiltrated the framework that we were supposed to keep and took it over. And we handed it to them. They wanted to help us out, so we gave it to them. And they constrained, reconfigured, took pieces and parts of the statutes and put them all together in one bill and said, okay, here's the new regime. And we didn't even see it. Well, over near in the Middle East, the same people, if you will, the same organizational structures that have conditioned the United States of America to be the bully and the brute that it is, has now created work in their plan to interfere with other people. And in Syria is a stark example. And in some regard, again, it sounds like I'm supporting certain governments. I'm not. I'm looking at a dynamic. And if we don't understand this dynamic, we are going to miss the point, because we're so focused on trying to say, oh, you believe in this, and this, and that makes you no good. We create a racism in ourselves by making the other, and when you make the other, then you think you are superior, and there's really no foundation for any of it. But this Russian army has reached the Iraqi border. It wasn't even the point. There's a video, and I'll send it to you in the broadcaster. You need to. It's in Russian. It's from the Russian military, doing a report on Syria and explaining their position in this whole thing and what's going on. And it was in big news, not big news Brzezinski. No, it was big news that Syria reached the Iraqi border, because remember, the Americans at al-Tanf attacked the sovereign army of Syria twice. And so the Syrian army made it to the border anyway. Now, they haven't taken al-Tanf. That's now been cut out by the United States government. But the point was about this video for me, and the blood clot of it all, is the United States, we have all our, provable interrelational problem with the United States and the so-called coalition, and its skullduggery, and the big news out of the Arab states and the throwing under the bus of Qatar. And you see how all this is moving together, and who they're moving against to do this. The big news here was in this video, and you'll read it because I don't understand Russian, and so I have to take with a grain of salt the translation, but it sounded good enough. It was integrated pretty clearly throughout the video, was that Russia is declaring, because of the way they've proceeded through this, it's not just going around bombing people. They've been trying to make peace and reconciliation for the government, for the nation of Syria, notwithstanding 2 or 3 different scales of battles going on. The which was Qatar and Arabia, United States, Britain created. Then the other created regime overthrowers called the Rebel Army, which are also the same but in different name. And then the world coming in and mercenaries coming in to fill in wherever they wanted to do, and the Syrian government having to fight all this at one time. Russia jumped in and just barely in time, and I still understand why they waited. And they've been trying to reconcile people. And I assume behind the scenes they're saying, listen, those of you that you considered so-called moderate rebels and you don't like the current government, you should do your changing politically. Stop fighting. And apparently that's been working. It's been working so well that all this stuff that we hear from Syria about the fighting may be Western media lying. Because in this video, and you hear it right, or you see it, at least read it, you can hear it if you know Russian, you can hear the military man there telling us that the civil war The Civil War, which was the internal battle that may have existed, is over. The Civil War is over. That leaves only the other parties, the mercenaries in that country now. Now, if the internal political battle is settled, and it's settled by contracts, and it's settled with a lot of work done by Russia, and there's still so-called battles with which is us, is the U.S., it's Israel, United States, it's Britain, and the so-called moderate rebels, which the United States supports. When the Syrian army comes to take their land back, and the United States strikes at them, and there's no internal battle, then it appears by this statement, which to me this is just monstrous news here, monstrous in a lot of ways. The Civil War is over, but the United States is still fighting Syria. There is no moderate rebel that isn't really is us, that is the United States by proxy. Now, what I found a little disappointing at this point, when they point out that there's essentially no reason now, given that there's no political battle inside Syria, with Russia's help through these reconciliation contracts, that you essentially are seeing the United States fighting without a purpose, notwithstanding their stated purpose. What I did appreciate with this statement was the Russia not calling this out more clearly. I sent out a tweet, whatever the hell it is. It says, "Quit Pussyfoot'n. The Syria-U.S. coalition is a terrorist or would have withdrawn from al-Tanf." Based on their quote that the Civil War is over. For those of us in the United States, this should be very, very concerning. I don't know what y'all want to think about doing about it, and I don't know what to do about it. But we have to understand that that's a group of people that are ruling over us as well. The al-Tanf, the United States has no position of protection to claim unless it's counter to the Syrian army. And the United States is an occupier now on that land that they are now defending with no right whatsoever in any context. Is this condition of extrajudicial imposition that I talked to you about, that everyone in the world lives under, because the United States is the warmongering bully and brute? Now, I'm not really, this was really a big story to me. This statement was very, very large that I think seemed to just kind of go right on by. Who listens to the Russians, right? This little video also it shows you, if you listen and read, you pay attention, you understand really all the work that's going on over there. That when I look at what's happening and being fomented in the United States between the people itself, maybe by look it's different, but in structure and function, it's all the same. That you're not getting any help to stop. In fact, it's fomenting. The United States government foments these things to gain that control. And we're seeing this very clearly at al-Tanf. The United States has no purpose there. If they did to fight ISIS, they would have withdrawn from that place as the army stepped in, because there were no terrorists there. Well, the reason why the United States are there is because it's a terrorist. And I'm disappointed that the Russians, with all their neutrality, and I understand what they're doing here, but there's also holding back. That they have to call, essentially, I'm figuring they have to call a spade a spade. And I sense for myself, that's what we, the people in the United States, the men and women with any responsibility, have to start forcing this into the common discussion. I really look at all these things and I find no value in our discussions because of these underlying foundational failures. And until we get these people that have infested the structures of government, we really can't live in any peace at all. Some entity as big as Russia having their handful to do this, and then Syria. You'll hear in the report Syria is really doing all the work. There's very little that except for the air flights, which are very, very important. I'm saying that on the ground, this is not like Russia has got boots on the ground like we would think that America has boots on the ground everywhere else as well. That America has boots on the ground literally in defense of a place that is a strategic place that they have no right to defend, and then they claim a defensive right against the sovereign army. Is the United States being a terrorist? You have to sink that in. You have to understand this government that we live under, the United States of America, is a terrorist. I said it's the war of terror. I told you that when they removed even international law in the memo of 2010, and they declared going extrajudicial, the wraps were off. This little 20-minute presentation of what's gone on and going on in in Syria from Russia. If you listen carefully, you'll hear the dynamic that this thing sits in, that we should not be okay with at all. My problem is that tells me that if we are, we're also agreeing to the abuse and same tactics going on in the United States of America. And I don't care what people might claim. We're not going to see a better day until we address it. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I think I've seen. I'm not even what I addressed you last week wasn't even addressing this thing. But the United States government is without authority, period, and no one says anything. Is what I see Israel doing to Palestine, is the same occupation on lands that they don't have right to. It's all the same method. Is someone sneaking into the state that you live in, so-called, and overthrowing it in favor of their rule over you and your acquiescence to it. We see the stark military side in Syria. They have figured out how to do the same thing without the presence of the military, at least to your perception. They changed the cops to be the military, as I've told you. I could see in the Lieber Code. Writing is all on the wall here, and we are crickets. I say that generally. Anyway, I don't even know more. I mean, I'm absent any actual thought, because the answer is the United States of America is an open terrorist. And the Russians, as much as they're doing, are not calling that out. And the UN is shown to be worthless as well. And until we, if I can say, evolve our minds out and above all this, we are going to be controlled by it. Now, I don't know all the geopolitical wranglings, and I can see some of it. I don't know that I agree with any of these governments doing what they have, but, Russia took on an issue, again, for its own geopolitical views, but if you watch what they're doing, they're acting the statesman and diplomat, as much as I can imagine in a war scenario. They're really, if this is a game to play, they're really playing well, really well. The United States is without a cause here. And the United States is without an excuse. And the United States is left without a response, except to go blow up the army of the sovereign nation, simply protecting its own territory, which is now occupied by a foreign force. And how this all plays out, I don't know. The Syrian army is proving itself to be very good at what it is doing. It's understood now to be the most experienced urban fighting force in the United States, in the world. Yeah, in the United States, the whole United States is now in the world, in the world at this point because of how it's gone. But if you look at the territory that they're going through, it's a war. It's just war. It's war field. There's nothing in the way that's any good anymore when this goes through, which is also part of the plan. The thing that I'm focused on is being involved in a part of a country because of my location that is the power that goes around and creates and causes that destruction and then prolongs it. You have to really understand this is not just, I'm taking over al-Tanf and I'm going to sit here and I don't have a right. This same country is killing people, innocent of all of this. They're being killed. Hundreds and hundreds a day. And I guess my observation there is if they're willing to kill hundreds and hundreds on this lie, this lack of cause, this lack of ability in law and lack of justice, then they're willing to do this to even their so-called own people. This also shows, as I say that, should show you this is a foreign power to those people. And the people were not to allow it. To me, with the end of the civil war, you have to understand that means there are no moderate rebels in Syria at this point. With Russia stating they've made agreements with everybody, that they made all the numbers too. They made agreements with all the people that were dissatisfied with the Syrian government to go in, whatever those agreements are, and take it up in the future when they get the whole territory settled back down again. There are no moderate rebels. Then what is the United States protecting and training over around al-Tanf and anywhere else they are? Is an invasion force by proxy. The United States has no standing to be where it's at. If it was telling the truth, it would have, because there was no terrorists in al-Tanf, and because the Civil War, all the agreements with everybody that was legitimate, that had an internal political question, challenge to the government, has been talked with and reconciled into a future political response, then there's no rebels there to protect either. What the purpose of the United States would have to protect them anyway is also a question. Then if there's no rebels and the Civil War is over, all we have there is a proxy terrorist occupation. And the United States is that occupation. Troubles me to no end. But it's not unexpected in a way. I told it to you that I explained all that in that memo from 2010. Again, that's such a large thing, I don't even know what more to say. We either come to our own terms with that and understand there's literal psychopaths in the government, and what you're living under is not a legitimate government by any stretch of the imagination. No different than the states being overthrown and occupied by a foreign corporation. It's really fascinating analysis to find out how they pulled the puzzle parts of the prior people's law together in the amendment to change everything and take a foreigner and domesticate that foreign entity. So it looked legitimate, but was foreign. This is the finanglings. I don't even want to give them any credit, but this is the new modernized way to take out societies. The Syrian example is the old way. And the only reason why it stopped was because someone stepped in that was stopping the wrong it saw that it needed to make right. And then it's making it right in the righter way. And I say that because war can't be an easy scenario to work through. This is the thing I'd say when I talk about, like last week, understanding you can read the documents of destruction laid out for us as a plan. Now, how do you handle that? Well, we have to take a more intelligent and the higher road, if I can say that, and maybe even that up until now that road less traveled, because I hope Gary L. and Gigi's Boo will be able to be on after the broadcast a couple hours. We take the more evolved, mental, intelligent approach to this, notwithstanding the war that's on. We deal with it in ways that Russia is showing us an example to do. One of the first things is to do with whether or not this is the understood way to say this and whether it's legitimate or not. I think it's legitimate because they've been holding off and doing it that way, was you take as peaceful a route as you can do it, and you still overthrow the occupier. Anyway, so the mirror, I say, that's out in Syria, in the Middle East, all of the Middle East, is a mirror of the United States. Should be relatively disconcerting to everyone. Well, it's not going to be to those that are trying to overthrow it or have overthrown it, and we have to wrestle it back. But I don't know why as I think about this, why am I even talking about it? There's not going to be anybody responding, and who cares? Why am I wasting my breath? I guess, again, behind the woodshed, it's about a principle. We have an example over in Syria of how it goes, how someone forces something to go wrong, how someone steps in to help aid an ally and make it better, and work through how to make that complete destruction back to a peaceful place that they can build again. We're watching in the United States that destruction going on. It's almost invisible to us. Notwithstanding, again, I really don't think anybody that would have read that message, that note, that letter that I read to you last week, I don't think anybody saw anything I said in that the way I showed it to you. And until we can start seeing these things, we're going to have some trouble dealing with what we're up against. But I've given you that insight. That principle works. And so for me, it's a matter of understanding those that are unprincipled and how they work. And then you see that principle violation is existent that you need to stop. And you have to reconcile that, just like the Russians are telling us. They have to reconcile that in a peaceful manner, is what I suggest to you is the way we approach all of these things. I don't know, how many years have I been doing this, folks? I don't think, I don't even know if I've made a slip of a thought that ever said, okay, well, we did talk about them tall oaks and short hemp ropes. Okay, we did talk that. But I don't think, other than that, as a side joke, and really the alternative we don't, our hands would like to do, but our intelligence says we ought not to. That was never offered as a legitimate response. That we're behind the woodshed. I don't think I've ever offered anything but a peaceful resolution, and told you to do that it takes time. And just looking at what the Russians have been doing by their report, and then look at what's happening on the ground as well, and looking through the different sources of news noticed to us by all the different factions that are in there trying to tell their part. I think that report's pretty accurate, and they are doing what they're saying in the way they're saying it. Whatever the geopolitical ramifications are, ultimately, I don't know. I'm not even looking that far. You can surmise all kinds of stuff. But wherever Russia has gone in to help and reconcile this destruction that was wrought and being wrought by the United States, now proven to have no cause whatsoever, shows that their continuing support and conditions and the method they're using is an example to us. And I'm telling you that whether you see blown up buildings and tanks in the streets of the United States of America, whether you see people in costumes called uniforms and colors of authority as those soldiers, there is the same war going on in your town. And it can be defeated. I wanted to say it must be defeated, but if we want to play the revolution, I guess we just let it go until we're destroyed, and then somebody in the future gets to pick it up, and then we say, okay, good, someone else picked it up. I got to have my beer. I got to have my entertainment. I got to pretend that I was freedom because I railed and talked about it, and didn't realize the first thing about any of it. And right about the time we're dying, we're finding out our sons and daughters are being beat down by the thing. They won't want to listen to us now because we didn't have the principles we gave them. Very few of them hold those principles and weren't reinforced in them. And you watch as your eyes close from this place that we've been brought into, you realize they're going to go down the tubes and there's nothing you can do about it now. So what do we do? Do we stand back, make excuses today? Do we take the lessons we see out in the world as the evidence of the truth against us? It's up against things up against us, and do we do something about those things, or do we get to the day we close our eyes, close our eyes for the last time, and realize that people that we truly cared about are defenseless against serious future harm? And in ways that I could have, well, it was sci-fi before. The cyborg, the flying insect that now becomes the pig human soldier spinach man, all being run by some computer because it's been adopted in its DNA to accept such things. And that's your future. You know, one of the most terrifying things I was thinking about as drones started to come in is that you have mechanized wars there's no people involved. And the only people that are involved, at least I'm saying no people as soldiers, only people that are out there are you as a victim of two major powers that have nothing but machines in a field. And that occurred because nobody stopped it when it started. And that occurred because you didn't understand, not only were you being physically, biologically changed so you wouldn't perceive it, and you were being augmented to receive it more efficiently. You lost all your principles in the first place. You couldn't be the example to anybody else. They took things away from you gradually. You didn't realize it. Oh, well, and then you didn't have the interest. Why would you have the interest? It's kind of like the reverse of what they took. They took the black away and I said nothing, and they took the Christian away and I said nothing, and they took the Jew away and I said nothing, and then they came for me and there was nobody to help me. Well, they do that with subject matter interests as well. They take them all away or they control them into oblivion. You didn't care about that, so you don't. What would you respond to that? So it's the back end side of the fact, well, you know, I may not agree with what you say, but I have to defend that you have a right to say that. Otherwise, I don't. If I see them taking your right and I don't defend against that, I won't have that statement. I won't have that ability in the future. Why we have to go to these authorita to have them tell us what the law is and how the system that they are, those authorita are a part of, are limited, has really been an amazing thing to me. Because I talked to you a long time ago, like I used to repair things. I don't do that so much anymore, and I don't have an interest in you either. Didn't know that it was a question that's whether or not you should be able to repair it. And so in this, this battle in society between everyone wants something, so you have to battle between those that don't want to give it up and those that want to take it. You get this thing called the courts. That even the idea that you have a right to repair something becomes a question is really fascination, at least to me. And how many people would be interested in that? But the few people that were denied and had to go through the hassle that the system has been set up to make it look like it's an authority to you to make that decision that should have never been a question in the beginning. But why I looked at the law of the land, literal land grants, And it quickly comes to mind when you put your application of how the law works, the law of trusts, the relationships, that any judge does not have jurisdiction or authority to decide the things that are settled in law. And yet we give it over to that all the time. The court system should just come right out and say, well, we don't have jurisdiction. That was settled right here. That's not a question. But no, they create this continuing occupation and control. And this subtlety goes on and on and on and on. And the foreigners found out how to exploit that. And that's part of that letter I was reading last week. It's a continuation of our destruction under the color of somebody coming to bring, rainbows and unicorns. The Supreme Court just bolstered your right to repair stuff. Why that was even a question, I don't know. I've told you this also backed itself up against a patent law. And that made no sense in the application and extension of these companies coming against you to possess your life through the things that you buy. Remember, the technocrats want the smart stuff in your life, and they want control over it, and they don't want you to mess with it, so they were asserting that you couldn't mess with anything once you bought it. And they were using patent rights and patent law and copyright law in order to protect that. And I told you that's just not the way that works in law. But that question actually ends up at the Supreme Court. In the place of a company who wants to make toner for a printer. And the company whose printer their toner was being made for, aftermarket, said, we have a copyright or a patent on that ink. Well, it just comes out now, and we needed to hear this, you know. Just what I've been saying to you, that the patent law can't be used to extend beyond the point of sale, because in short form, a patent is a protection of the government in your intellectual property to market that property. And I told you, once that property is marketed, that ends your protection right, or your, the protection is the protection against anybody else selling your intellectual property in the open market. And for some time. There's a statute of limitations against that. And Congress seems to change that a bit. It's gone changing a lot. Now we get the people, the elites on high now have commanded the proof of the law after all this time and cost to all these people. There's reasons everyone hates printers. They break jam and always run out of cyan ink, which I'll get it out inexplicably. No, I won't get it out. Inexplicably. Why can't I say my L's? I think I have having a speech impediment. Inexplicably. There it is. Oh, it fixed. Also breaks them. That must have been the word break. Even when they work, toner costs so much you have to give up avocado toast for a month to buy more. Well, who can afford avocados anyway? Who can afford a printer? If I can't send it to you in an email, you ain't getting it. As Matthew Inman, one of the greatest poets of his time, famously said, either printer ink is made from a unicorn blood or we're all getting screwed. The point about this case is that Lexmark sued the company that was making the extra ink. The Supreme Court came back and said, there's no violation to your patent. And you need to read through about this situation for those of you that have cars and smart things and products from the companies and all that stuff, software stuff, and all these repairable devices that were said that you have to go to one monopolized producer, manufacturer. This court case speaks to all that, and you need to understand that this is a pretty far-reaching case, and how they analyzed it in order that you want to apply this decision in the logic is really going back to the black and white of the originating law and being able to see that black and white for what it is and not what you're told it is. And then taking that understanding on how you did that and turning it against people that come to you in any capacity, whether they come in official capacity or just somebody making a complaint, your neighbor. And laying that out objectively. You don't have to get all upset about it. Just lay it out. Here's what it says. Now where inside this limitation do you have the right? And you come to very quickly, you learn how to very quickly come to terms with things, and you don't have to get upset. You don't have to go to fight. You don't even have to go to court. You don't even have to involve yourself. More than that. And when you have to involve yourself more than that black and white objective basis that has been at least agreed, unless you can find a violation in that objective basis to some other thing, which is what the real challenges are for a really good court. You all live in peace based in those objective bases laid down for everybody to follow. And I don't know why people are so resistant to doing that. No different than I showed the miner who, in fact, someone had a phone. This technology is really great. I told you, for as much as it's a trap, it's still it's a godsend, or maybe alien send, or maybe we're just little clever monkeys. I don't know. But guy's got a phone in his hand, and I said, he has access to the internet. He starts looking up something I'm talking about. I said, you have that? You have the internet? Can you get those statutes up? He got the statutes up. I said, well, show that to this other miner. Let him read these sections. I was able to point out those sections. All the difference in the world. Immediate understanding. Because you see the black and white. We don't have an argument at that point. And this is what I've been watching that the system and people do. They interfere in ways that aren't objective. And you buy into that lack of objectivity, and now you have an argument. Now you have given them the opportunity to put their position in, and it's these alternative positions that you start consenting to. That I've been attempting all these years to try and get you to follow through with. Get familiar with that process. And your problems go they're a lot less intense, and they can be a lot shorter. And I say can, and I'm hesitant because what we bit off was a big chunk. So it's an ongoing thing what we're into. So, but people to people interaction, men and women interacting, or men and men, whatever the heck it is, in your daily lives, we all go off on this opinion what we think is. We don't have a clue. And in fact, people I deal with, even with the mining stuff, they come and they make a comment, and I realize this in the comment, they never read the law. They wouldn't say that once they read the law. And that because they didn't read the law and they have a misunderstanding, they now have a question they are now suffering under and have suffered under it for years. That knowledge of the law would have cleaned up years ago. There's no argument at the point that these things have been stated in what we call the law for most everybody, generally. Now, for those of us, myself, that would look at the rudiments of the occupation that tries to ignore the rudiments of the foundations of law, we still have work to do. And all of us, that means all of us do too, but most of us aren't involved in that. This case, very important, is that the patentee cannot extend his power, his rights, his protection beyond the point of sale. I'm looking at the article. I guess I could read it, but somehow I'm just not feeling too thrilled to read any of this stuff, to tell you the truth. I want you to understand that there's issues created that are false issues. And depending on the subject matter and the issue that you're involved in, you can cut that short. You can cut that really short, especially in an administrative context, against what we all rail is the government being so bad. It's really people inside the government that are contorting things. It's you being ignorant of that. And then it's you also being ignorant of the remedy that you can assert to cause them to force them back to the correct path. Which is the law, their obligations and duties. And I look around and I see so many problems, because we deal in our opinions and we deal in these conjectural things, and we deal essentially in frivolous matters, And that's where those that have the plan want us to be. And I know there's a big resistance against what I say, because essentially it makes you take responsibility. And I think internally we know we don't want to do that. And so it's left to the few of us to fight these things and then be filtered through the system. As I told you, they will not let me in a court of law. Now how we got into 2013 was that my name wasn't the lead name. Normally when I go into court, I have my name on the page. They can identify. I must have a flag or something. I cannot get into a court of law in this country, it seems. I can get in if I'm a sub-name, because we proved that in 2013. We led with Jefferson Mining District. I was just like kind of trailing caboose, and we got our case in. And it was a open and shut, if I can say that. Default judgment. Couldn't answer. I know the courts are closed to a lot of people that know what the answer might be, but there's not that actually many that know how that works. That's the filter that goes on. Then you have those that go and use the system, the lawyers, so they can bolster themselves, and they have that little game going on. It looks like people are winning. As I've told you, the administrative side of this, like all the public land for let's see, who is that? Pacific Legal Foundation or something? Great work. They get people to not be oppressed by agencies, but the argument they advance is not property law. It's administrative law. And so everyone says, oh, Ray, we won, and in fact, there is no win. There's just a continual agreement that administrative law has a say over foundational things, and it can't. And well, I say it can't, but see, that's conditioned by the occupation that it can. And so if the system filters through what it filters through, people may not understand what that is. Those that are involved with it understand it's a big organized criminal syndicate. That's not an opinion now for us. We've already proven it. We have the record that proves all that. They do trafficking and money laundering. Everything they say you can do, you can't do, they do better. They have collusion, racketeering. Oh, it's not an opinion. We've got a record of exactly how it works. And the particular laws that are violated, and we have it on the record. And then you say, well, what good has it done? Well, we got the record. What do you got? We live in an existence of organized crime. What's your answer to that? markonthebeast@yahoo.com, you got a viable answer. That isn't more time spent addressing this and the more need for more people to do it. Why? Because there was a republic if we could keep it. Each one of us, and then all of us. So now it's answered, folks. So you can, the patent extends only to where the point of sale is, and you now own that stuff. Then that's going to kill GM and what they were trying to do with your software in your cars. That's going to kill John Deere and the product there, and it's going to stop all this nonsense where people were trying to take the property they thought they had bought from the manufacturer or the inventor of that device and thought they purchased it, that they could use it free. This case now comes forward and it's official. You can. So you tinkerers should be able to rejoice, I guess. So we get filtered out of the system. We get people thieving where they're not supposed to be thieving. They take a license beyond what law allows. And I'm saying this isn't even a hard call. These people that, like, in particular the corporations and things, they really want to grab up as much as they can. This thing about that bottom line and their object is to make a profit for the shareholder needs to be looked at. We need to step back and go, well, the object of the corporation ought to be to the public good. And so that anybody who's harmed by the corporation, instead of being attacked underneath a patent right, they can come back and answer, but your attack beyond the patent right is not for the public good, and I'm going to attack your corporation. You keep doing this, I'm going to take you out. I'm going to take away your charter. We need to bring that provision back. Okay, so what did I just bring up? I brought up trying to bring up a solution for all that has gone wrong, that people extend beyond their lawful authority, or the authority law grants to them, they extend beyond to go harm somebody else. Is no different a crime than any other theft. But this color of authority makes it a felony. And there needs to be back, especially when it's a corporate entity, a legal entity, not just corporate entity, but a legal entity. They need to come to toe of accountability under the same law that they have life born into or born from. Now again, behind the woodshed, I'm looking at principles and how we execute on those in order to bring some sanity back into our lives. We are going to have to do that. It's we, the people that are supposed to keep the republic. The corporations are nothing. They're just there to make a profit, and they're unaccountable in doing so. We have to bring that accountability back. Why are you being held accountable and those aren't? Why do those have the right to interfere with you in the first instance where they have no right and cause you harm and trouble and fraud and money, whatever that is, and then in the time to defend yourself with the 50-50 chance you could lose in a system that's set up to filter out what the future we want? This is a big thing to think about. I don't think people want to do it. I don't want to do it, I guess. None of you want it. I don't want to do it. But I don't think many people appreciate that they have to do it. Take their part. All of y'all, take your part and really work it over and listen for as much as it can be accepted. Like when I was listening to Ron Stevens' comments about Michael Schmidt, just something comes out to offer. And some of it I heard he was picking up, taking and running with and made his own way with parts of that. It was great to hear that. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. You find the thing you become focused on to offer to people. In the meantime, you're working on problems that you need to resolve. And here there's going to be one less problem for us, those of us that would modify things, those of us that would buy properties thinking that they are ours when we did so. They are ours. And the only thing that patent law allowed was that the inventors would be protected for some time to market their ideas so they could. I mean, it's a big problem for at least the small inventor to market their ideas. As I was telling you, a friend of mine, invented the laser arbor, and two big corporations came in to steal it. And apparently we did the impossible. We got it back. The patent attorney that my friend went to advise him on how to approach the problem said it was impossible. But we got it back for my friend. The corporations weren't supposed to do what they did. But in the meantime, there was a lot of money stolen in property that was sold that you can't get back. And so this is a system of plunder as well. And although it's now back in his name, he doesn't get the totality of the value that laser arbor that did go to the corporations, that there should have been a remedy in law to go after their existence. And so, not only do they have any limit on law, the black and white, the court will at times do the obvious constraint and decide in that way. Not so obvious is these things that roll out against us that the government imposes, that they put you in a double bind. And now I'm moving over to, you got the property, you thought it was yours, and outside of the eminent domain, which attaches to land, but this ability to search and seize as well, property, the government just goes through on the land as the privateer for now the corporate government, and seizes all your stuff on what they claim to be criminal charges. So the other report here I had was the report a couple weeks ago. I think it came in the news or the notice. He sold $100 in marijuana, so the government seized Grandma's $54,000 house. And this is a case that came out, I think, Pennsylvania. I look at the title, I forget. It's been a little while now. Yeah, Pennsylvania Supreme Court. So this is a state court. And they said, we've been talking about forfeitures and the criminality that it is. And remember, the other thing that I was telling you, the other case, it says you're presumed innocent. And that's absolute. You need to go get that case and put that in your bag of law. And I suggest this is going to be one of those precedent-making. This is one of those precedent. That shouldn't have been a question. See, that's another one of those cases that shouldn't have been a question. But that when it became a question, it was answered in the affirmative that your right to be presumed innocent is absolute. This case in Pennsylvania comes right after that, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court went through the Eighth Amendment in order to say that it's unfair and it's outside of the reasonableness of penalty to take Grandma's house and her minivan, which she was living in at the time, after the state came in and stole all that stuff under the color of authority. In this decision, it states, this is one of the most important civil forfeiture decisions issued by a court and the most important ever issued in Pennsylvania, said in a Turner. The court has set forth a comprehensive constitutional framework for analyzing forfeiture claims that should substantially curb forfeiture proceedings in Pennsylvania and is likely to influence other state courts considering these issues. The notice to you is other state courts may find different. This could be headed for the Supreme Court as well, given other states won't give this level of protection. Again, I won't read the whole story, just give you the standard of it. If you're an innocent third party, your stuff can't be taken underneath color of a criminal offense done by somebody else in Pennsylvania. Now, this shouldn't even be a question. And remember, I've suggested to you over and over again, when you go read, kind of intimated about it, and the admiralty provisions of the penal code, these forfeitures are in admiralty, and the Constitution requires all admiralty considerations to be in a federal court. That these state courts may show here, I believe they do, show us example of being a servient state to the federal, and are federal courts, if not in name, they are in function, because unless someone can show me the Congress, as you heard, having to give states the right to do compacts amongst themselves in that one law we read, or that one condition we read, there has to be a statute that says the states can enter underneath this provision of the federal authority to do so. I haven't found it. So so I leave open the point that there might be, but until I can find it, the forfeiture and seizure like this is under admiralty. It should have been dealt with and removed to a federal court, is my first problem with this. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has come up and said that you can't steal from innocent third parties. Should have never made the page because it shouldn't have happened in the first place. But that it did, it explains to you how no one is functioning at the official level under law first. They use the excuse that you get to go through the Supreme Court and that does justice. That's another colorable felony against you. But here's a Pennsylvania court. Maybe those of you that are into this in your local states can now advocate to your legislators that they're not supposed to be looting quite so much. Here's the analysis by Pennsylvania. We want to see the same thing starting to implement here. You don't need, in a sense, you don't need some of the laws to be written here. See, this is the other point. The Constitution, the federal Constitution applicable to the states under the 14th Amendment, it makes it certain that you aren't a third party vulnerable. That's what this Pennsylvania court decision going through that says. That you shouldn't need a new statute. You should just recognize what the existing framework of the Constitution of limited form government, not as principal privateer plunderer is, as the new found corporations are, but as an organic government is required to limit itself from harming the people that it's duty bound and has oath to secure, allowed to be secure in their houses and papers and things in themselves. I guess it's a subtle difference of how I would approach this, but I don't see why these are questions that are answered just the way I'm telling you they ought to be answered. So they're saying that this is a victory for property rights. I don't know why it is a victory in that the governments were never supposed to trespass that. So remember, they're taking credit in saying that. And this is just an article, and this is how they've given it a title. I understand that. But this is still the sentiment by people conveying ideas. This is not a victory for property rights. The victory is when no property is ever trespassed in the first instance where it's not supposed to. That's the victory, that government constrains itself to law. There's no miner that's ever been attacked that so-called won his case that actually won, where he had to spend all the time away from production, the money away from that had to go divert to something to protect him, and putting himself in jeopardy underneath an agent called a bar member, put before a corrupt court called a court system that has many, many years of extension, that miner could have said to have won, where he was never supposed to be challenged, and his grant of exclusive possession and use over the entire claim was supposed to be peaceful. The very definition of the courts is adversarial. It's by definition not a peaceful interaction. Am I making sense here to you folks? Next question, I look over. How long have I been yakking here? Is anybody listening? Why is this a question? It's probably going to be one of my dying day questions. Why? Because we don't step up and say, listen, you folks are just, you're taking credit where no credit is due. And you're not supposed to be doing this. If we needed them to say so, it's said so now. We're going to stop this and other things just like it down the path that are going on. Yeah, I'm reading this here. What do I want to tell you? How much do I want to read? You need to read this. If all you can read is stories because you think the statutes are too complicated and you can't figure them out, and you can't read these stories, then I don't know, I can't help you. I want you to read the words of these stories. Me talking about it's not going to be as fulfilling to you to understand these underlying things that were blocked from us, or we have been blocked from by mental control, by us being trained for so many years on what to think or how to think, even outside of what I thought school was a great thing. It was a lot of opportunity to go jump around and experiment. I told you, I don't know how many times I got, it wasn't an inordinate amount of time. I'm sure they would have said you're too dangerous, but I don't know how many times the fire department got called out to an experiment I was doing in chemistry class. Outside the curriculum and outside the school or the class, I was in there on my own time while the instructor was doing his work. He let me go in the back. Now some of you are thinking, what do you mean chemistry class? You don't even see a chemistry class how far they've got us dumbed down. So to me, school was something I was able to use to just look around and being I get a little monkey myself. What happens when I mix these two things together? Okay, it wasn't quite that ad hoc, but the point was, to me these facilities my folks could have never created for me. The school, the chemistry, the biology, the photography class, all the chemicals, the darkroom. Were not available to me in my household. No fault of my father. He's raising a bunch of kids and doing what he could like everybody else was. Going to school allowed me access to stuff I couldn't do, and I just rolled up my sleeves and said, let's go play. Let's go learn something. That was my experience about this. And so I may have a different view now as the world starts to be constrained, don't even know what a chemistry class is. Now go look at the internet. You can find some guy mixing vinegar and baking soda. Look what's that doing? I mean, do you even know the most basic tests for gases that you create so you don't blow yourself up or poison yourself out? Do you even know the most basic tests for that? And you have all the things in your kitchen to be able to do for yourself? No, a lot of this knowledge is all gone. They don't want you to do any of it. They want you to not know the most important thing you need to know about was property rights. And I've told you over and over again, if you said I haven't said it for a long time, if you don't know about property and property rights, you probably are property. And yet the answer is right in our face as a question answered by the system that's corrupt that started it. You understand the condition that the executive stole and the judiciary said, well, you went too far. That's the same system. And they claim that's the best we got, folks. Well, I can want to talk about Trump wants to streamline stuff? I got a few ideas on streamlining this. Going to be a whole lot of hands off. A whole lot better checks and balances, initiated checks and balances before the government can get involved. Another report I picked up on that and it's from the people, the legal defense, the attorneys who argued it. No, not so fast. Pennsylvania Supreme Court Supreme Court's check on civil asset forfeiture. I think this is another one of those big cases. Remember, it's going to be specific to Pennsylvania, but these points are extensible, I think, into the other states, and you go back through the Constitution, which they're subject to. You re-lock down the government. Don't allow it to extend out too far. It won't happen on its own, folks. And if you let the legislators do it, they'll condition it a bit, as we see all kinds of things going through as we look at their work. Because very few people that are legislators, and then really, what are they legislating? Since the overthrow, they're not even legislating as we would think about it. They're simply asserting policy. Don't ever forget that right now, and maybe into the known future. It's not law what they do. It's all policy. If you can sit in a vested space, a vested condition, that's where you find your vested rights. You can, your condition, your position, your property, your remedy, it is antecedent the position of the current usurpation. Antecedent means that you're before their authority gets started. That's what vesting does. And so it's a big case. It's probably, at least for the state level, it's probably as big in one regard as that you're absolutely presumed innocent. Now you got to really think about how you extend that. That's a big, 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 big deal that I have really heard nobody talking to, and not that I get out much, but nobody's made. I haven't heard all the media types. I'm talking MSC. I'm talking the alternatives, those that purport themselves to be alternative media. The documentarians. I heard anybody talking about this. It's probably one of the biggest non-proofs that we needed to hear being stated and made relevant to us today. And I told you that, so continually extend that out, and now you're going to get yourself back to attack the NDAA. Well, you've been now deemed through this exigence called national security without proof on its need or its logical consequence that you're an enemy combatant, that you can be picked up by an administrator, a bureaucrat, or before that, you're now deemed a misdemeanor by your actions, subject to the so-called PATRIOT Act, the Patriot Act, as an enemy combatant, and these can be all attacked. I wish people understood, as I think about that, if people understood what I'm saying, we would be, I don't know how these usurpers can stand against us, given that we attack on these points. We get back what they stole from us. Those two acts alone took away your presumption of innocence. The Supreme Court just said your innocence is absolute until it can be shown. Not made up by like the FBI does. We're having the tools of the things that we can defend ourselves against the attacks I told you were coming, and are here. They're here already. That's why these are so important. Now remember these, and I have another report on this Pennsylvania story, just to give you as I found them, to bring them. It's the decision of the case. And what was interesting is the parties who got involved, the guy who sold the marijuana in his grandmother's house, or his mother's house, I think it was, actually, if I remember that, but no, it doesn't matter. You get to read the story and how it all worked out for what they did. You need to see the skullduggery that goes on with the cops to begin with. But this case, remember, was a forfeiture case, the seizure of a property. The property is considered the violator, not the people. And so the one that got caught for the marijuana, the $190 for the marijuana, and the mother or grandmother, it doesn't put the grandmother, maybe the grandmother was there, were not part of the case. That the case is called the Commonwealth versus the 1997 Chevrolet. Remember they talked about that minivan? And also the real property itself was on the lawsuit. But it was seized from the guy who did the marijuana, but he didn't own it. And so Elizabeth Young is the grandmother, sues, but they sued in the case of Commonwealth versus the 1997 Chevrolet. If you think it gets kind of weird in admiralty law or seizure stuff. This is just the vessel the vessel was sued, see? This is Admiralty law. And I don't see I would really need guidance on this. How did the state courts, how are they able to hold Admiralty proceedings where the federal constitution says that the exclusive jurisdiction for Admiralty is in the federal court system? Now, I've tried to argue that point a long time ago when they collected me up before on that child services thing I was doing, the documentary I was making, so they could destroy that. Well, that's the time they took my truck at that time, and I went to go argue this, and they wouldn't let me in court to argue it either. This very point of jurisdiction on the state court. I wanted to remove it to federal court and then fight them at the Admiralty side because I understood that better. They won't recognize the Admiralty in the state court, but they just call it a seizure, and they sue the vessel, the 1997 Chevrolet in this case. So when you get to the point when you start to really see what's supposed to go on in law, and we're all duty bound to know the law, so this is not something you say, oh, you have the luxury to go do. No, we were all to know this. This is not an exclusive to any one of us. This is supposed to be inclusive of all of us. Since at least 2000, when I enter into a jurisdiction and argue on the points I know the law are, and they defeat the system, the judge, the other party, whatever, and that other party is the system. It doesn't matter whether they're an officer, an employee, an agent, an instrumentality. It doesn't matter. That the cases that I have will not allow me to argue the law. And that's not an excuse that says, well, they're only statutory courts. No, because I'm saying that if they don't have the law, then they are now trespassing outside of their jurisdiction, you see. And so that's a different problem. They can't even claim the seizure as violation, as contraband against the system that doesn't have the monarch didn't have the authority to impose. Why? That's why I tell you when you get into that, and I've told people that would listen, you're positioning yourself at the minimum within the Admiralty law as a neutral in war. In other words, you have prior license to be where you were, and they couldn't bring the laws of war on you. In the case of Admiralty, Admiral, I get it, this is war stuff. They couldn't do that to you. So, a little bit there, some tidbits for all those of you picking up the nuggets, to expound a little bit better for yourself. This case, I've got the link for this case. It's interesting to read these things. It certainly, it continues to educate me a bit. Really maybe remind me of the things that I don't use all the time, but need to keep track of. You all need to keep track of this. And I do have this, remember I was just talking about the innocence is presumed. I have this link again. I've hold this out. This is going to be, I think, a big case of victory. Supreme Court rules states cannot steal money from the innocent. This is what I was telling you before. It's that old case happened just 2 weeks or 3 weeks before the Pennsylvania case. These are seriously important things to understand and bring and have with you in whatever you are doing. It doesn't matter about just being against a cop. I would apply this innocent situation. They can't steal money. How about can they then impose you with a regulation that steals money, that causes time from you, that steals your life? This is an extension that this case, this victory in the Supreme Court rule is immense when you apply it in this regard. We aren't supposed to, until conviction, until probable cause, actual probable cause complaint. That probable cause has standards. You've got to go read about that. Remember, I haven't seen in recent cases at all the statement of the articulable basis as a challenge, or the failure of it as a challenge at all over 10 years. I haven't seen it yet. It kind of disappeared. One of the main things has to happen in probable cause. Up until probable cause, you are absolutely presumed innocent. You're still presumed innocent after, but the probable cause affidavit then triggers a slight change. The presumption of innocence doesn't change, though, as this case says. It's absolute. So we can extend these things on and use them as our shield. Now, if we needed it, here it is. The occupier's courts have stated they have a limit, and they really can't go beyond. And these fundamental things that are written would be a truly huge embarrassment, if minimum, to really, I mean, at some point I think they don't want to even challenge the natives on this. It'd be too large, to say that they're not presumed innocent. But so we can pick these up right now as current, and these are important because you'll see all the people that are the usurpers and like the eco-terrorists and all the academia and all these people that impose their non-law upon you will look for current law precedences, like the rest were no good or something. That's a violation, but the current courts may insist upon that. The point is that's why these are also very important. They're really current law. They're brand new. This year. This is big stuff. And I told you before, as I just thought about the victory and the presumed innocence, I think this is directly assertable against the TSA. If you can go through there and you know how to defeat the enemy combatant status of the NDAA and then the Patriot Act, you can go right, again, this is the power I was telling you about, going after the presumption of the national security as a non-proven color of authority that they don't have. Now, another Supreme Court decision came up in these lines of this property and what's all related with property. It all kind of came together as well. As I keep telling you, this stuff keeps coming together. If you look, you can see it as if it's something out there coming together to tell you, here's the subject matters that we're coming to answer for y'all. One way or the other, could be good, could be bad. The Supreme Court overturns a Ninth Circuit provocation rule. Now, this is kind of a convoluted case in a way, and so you really should read it very slowly, very carefully, and really think about this. But the Ninth Circuit now has been overthrown again. I don't think that circuit, at last time I checked, was 72% wrong on its decision. So if you go through the Ninth Circuit, the odds are your case is decided 72% wrong, and then you get a 1% if you're a pro se, if they call you a pro se or pro per. If you're trying to go through the Supreme Court on your own, your chances are less than probably 1.001% to get into the Supreme Court because they have the court clerk in the way, throwing you out. And that court clerk, we haven't yet found the ability to get accountability on the court clerk for their decisions. That's another final filter. You get an attorney, though, you might be able to get in. And only 10% of the cases, I understand, get through the Supreme Court. But this one got through, and this is a little bit, like I said, convoluted. The Supreme Court gets it wrong, and the Ninth Circuit gets it wrong again by making a rule as applied to defense liabilities in the defense of yourself when you're dealing with the government and a police officer. The United States Supreme Court, and there's a bunch of links on this website, a link that you'll get in the Blogcaster, so you can go through this yourself. This is critical because this appears to take away your ability to defend yourself. This was a troubling case which this decision appears to counter the decision that you're presumed innocent. And it did it by destroying a rule which actually needs to be destroyed, but the condition that happens that's left, the destruction that's left in the wake, is one where it doesn't actually give the cops more power, but it leaves it open that they could claim it. And that sticks us back to the thing where you have to end up going to another case and potentially be dead here is the point. Be dead. How are you going to defend yourself against this? I don't know. You're going to be dead before you get the right to go after the cops for using what's left over from removing the provocation rule, which violates your right to have your ability to have a castle that the cops can't come in. This rule removal actually requires that the cops have that warrant. But again, the Supreme Court's decision have been that they can be wrong in their interpretation. And so to me, this is a very serious case decision that on one level has an answer to the law, but in doing that leaves open to the opportunists in the government, the cops and the lawyers and the attorneys and the system to literally move in, use the exclusion, use a couple more cases and actually kill you. Enough there. You can come to your own determinations after you read this. You kind of need to know this, and you need to then go back into that use of force continuum, which comes to play, but also is not in play. And this is the problem that the courts have now, in my mind, created. It requires that we understand these things as we move into the time when it isn't clear that you aren't living, that the cops aren't actually military, and still believing it and still being protected by the system to be the military. These important cases that show that you have the right to your stuff, and you have the right to innocence, and you have the right to the law that they're constrained by, is still not so set in stone that those decisions had to be made. That hasn't settled in on the system quite yet. The early birds on this one may not get any worm, they'll be dead. And your loved ones will have to pick up after you, so they need to know and push this point where the Fourth Amendment actually means something. The Provocation rule created by the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, which allows law enforcement officer to be held liable for an otherwise defensive use of deadly force if the officer provoked the violent encounter, was the thing that was removed. Judges Samuel Alito, in the writing from the court, stated that the officers cannot be held liable for excessive force under the Fourth Amendment because, quote, a different Fourth Amendment violation cannot transform a latter reasonable use of force into an unreasonable seizure, close quote. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. Judge Alito wrote, this issue with the Provocation rule is that it instructs courts to look back in time to see if there was a different Fourth Amendment violation that is somehow tied to the eventual use of force. The distinct violation, rather than forceful seizure itself, may then serve as the foundation of the plaintiff's excessive force claim. This approach mistakenly conflates distinct Fourth Amendment claims. Contrary to this approach, the objective reasonableness analysis must be conducted separately for each search or seizure that is alleged to be unconstitutional. Now, the problem with this whole thing, and it sounds like a lot of words, and there's a list here that you can use to go educate yourself. Oh, there's a reasonableness analysis. What is that? Go learn. But in this case, there was no seizure. I was shocked. This case turns on a seizure that never actually happens. They came in through a house without a warrant, these cops, went into a backyard, found some people living in the backyard in a shack, unannounced. These cops come in. The guy had a BB gun. They're sleeping. His pregnant wife is there, or girlfriend's there. The cops come busting in the door. He stands up with a BB gun, and the cops unload 15 rounds into both of them. This case says that they weren't held liable for doing that. And yet they were never seized. Well, they were shot. They were put in the hospital. But they didn't come in and seize them. I was almost horrified at this whole decision. There was no seizure. And they're deciding it on that standard. See, they applied something not applicable when you had the right to be not even in the constitutional constraint here. Anyway, this story goes on and on. This is a very troubling case, although, as I responded out to a professor who made a claim, and I should have picked that up and I didn't on the Twitter. He made you wouldn't have liability, you wouldn't have a cause on the subsequent force. And I challenged him on the term that he used, subsequent. There shouldn't be subsequent force on a violation. And he came back and answered that he would not allow for qualified immunity. And I said, so there would be no subsequent force. I agree. And that's the problem of answering these things in 140 characters on Twitter. You see, there's a whole other statement that has to be that they use this in qualified immunity. They shouldn't have that. And they should get a warrant. And there should be no question as to liability when neither happens. And so this is a troubling case of what didn't get answered. And I think this is so serious and so broad spectrum. I think you all really need to settle down and read about it. Try to figure out what you can figure out about it so that when you're encountering these lunatics, when you hear, you got to really get your ears up. You hear anything might be coming down, you better write up a quick letter and say, don't do that. You better make your notices known beforehand. You better have the city or the county council and commissioners make rules that that the cops are going to be liable if they don't get this stuff in the first instance. Forget the qualified immunity. You strip them from that point before. So this was a troubling case. For me, I was more shocked. I went back, I said, wait a minute, they keep referring to seizure. There wasn't a seizure. How do you make a ruling when upon something that never happened? Mark on the beast, yahoo.com. I'm not the absolute mind on understanding this. Maybe you can help me understand what I missed. But if I didn't understand the corruption that still sits there, that they claim to be the best we got, I don't think so, folks. So now I'm moving on to my next tab. I'm going to have to change the tactics here. We're going to tack over a little bit more about your body being harmed by things that are inflicted upon you unannounced. Cops come in and shoot your pregnant girlfriend in the back, shoot you a bunch of times. You lose your leg. Did I tell you that happened to the guy too? And the court comes in and says that was reasonable? That was excusable? The court actually made a decision. The district court made a decision that was not an excessive use of force. And so, other things inflicted upon you are moving into your health a bit. And you need to know this. Some of these things I really want to get to first because they're up front. Again, if you don't have your health, you got nothing. If you are being interfered with in your health, you're going to have nothing. If you don't understand what's going up against you, you're going to get into bad health and you're going to end up having nothing again. You'll be incapable of defending, of helping yourself and helping others if that's what you can see you do. In one regard, I can't see you help yourself the general sense, and you are helping others, and that's why I don't understand why there's not more just stepping forward unless you're a closet sociopath. New tumor evidence found in confidential glyphosate data. So here if the cops aren't blowing holes in you and giving you lead poisoning, we have another, I guess you could use glyphosate to extract all that lead. It is a descaler. It is a binder of mineral. I guess we can maybe use that as an offset. But major news on the glyphosate front. Monsanto's gem. The first ever independent analysis of the complete confidential data set sent by industry to the EU for relicensing of glyphosate shows EFSA and ECHA's safety assessments would have failed to identify several cases of tumors and cancers following an exposure to the substance. It is high time the complete data set is published in full to enable scrutiny by the scientific community. What about you, folks? What about you? According to Christopher Portier, a leading environmental health and carcinogenicity specialist, that's a big category made by the government, who has been actively defending the IARC assessment in the glyphosate relicensing process in the EU. The public agencies who perform the scientific assessment of glyphosate's toxicity, I won't read the rest of the acronyms, would have failed to identify 8 cases of statistically significant increase in tumors following glyphosate exposure in the confidential data set provided by industry. I can go on again. I can read and read. I just want you to be of notice. Finally, there's other tests coming about this glyphosate. I guess if you want it as being a chemical descaler for your pipes, your iron pipes or your boilers, this would be great stuff. But inside you, not so much. And remember, there's probably not a food you can eat now that doesn't have traces of this chemical in it. And remember more importantly, those so-called inert chemicals that are thousands of times more toxic that follow with glyphosate, in the glyphosate, are not tested for, that are also being ingested now by probably most everybody in any agriculturally advanced society, and anybody living, any non-agriculturally advanced society living below an agriculturally advanced society in the watershed. So, word to the wise, I suppose, we can know that these chemistries are really not good for us. Whatever the answer is, look to having diets that are more less involved with these industrial things as you can. It's going to be very, very difficult, but I think after some point it becomes so much to do. But at some point we start to learn how to do it, and there's people out there that can focus their time and come up with the ideas that we can just adopt. We don't each one have to come up with these answers, but all of us have to find something that we are interested in, or otherwise, see the corporations are so numerous and their activities so broad spectrum and profit motive oriented without accountability. We kind of have to do the same thing while we're also protecting ourselves, and then come to some solution. And I think part of it is to bring back corporate accountability. Really, in a systemic way, not in a governmental systemic way, not so that you have to sue them. You just make a complaint, the Secretary of Interior goes after them based on the probable cause-based thing that you have, where you claim, and get it back to there's a law in your state that says the corporations will be held accountable for things that they are not doing in the public interest. And that's just a brief statement. I'd have to go back and look at maybe the totality of what corporations are to do beyond the profit to their shareholders. In other words, they can't seek a profit to their shareholders where they're going to make a harm in the world. If that's not a law now, then it ought to be, I think. I guess that's an opinion. We living in this system of, the EU is another fabricated jurisdiction as well. I hope you didn't get past that. The European Union, it's like a big labor union, it seems to me. A big political labor union. It's not Europe. And so understand that too. I don't want to give credit, I'm saying it because I don't want to give credit to the EU for finally checking into this. Everybody should have been looking into this. The European countries, the people, and the people in it should have been looking at this. And that's another problem with the EU, in my mind, is nothing different than a big union where you consent into it and they become your voice. It's no different than what I talked to you last week about coming in, the notice from the Department of Agriculture coming in to give you a voice. It's within their union, in their agency. No different than the miners in the MMAC. The MMAC wants to be your voice. Well, it means it's taking your voice. It becomes your voice. And that would be fine if you didn't have bigger obligations and duties, which you do. So it's a problem. I told you, this is a global imposition, this method. I guess there's an evidence I can show you. I went right through last week's discussion, 2 points, and here's a third one. The EU itself is one of these usurpacious voices. So they find it good, at least somebody found it, but be careful on giving too much credit on what they're doing here. This also comes underneath the auspices of all the other global governance conditionings too. It was sitting there and passed those supposed protections. And so we see these systems are really legal entity systems promoting legal entities, and essentially profit is more important than you, essentially, even though they have these standards. And these people that make these entities, these artificial organizations are ruling the day without constraint. You've consented over all your authority to these people running amok in these organizations that have allowed it up until it was found. And so what do we have? These people in organizations that you're connected to are affecting your life every day, and you don't quite understand what their goal and agendas are. And another story along the lines of this global governance condition, that EU finds a problem in the glyphosate, a globally used supposed technocratic, in my view, technocratic chemistry moves this thing along, and we get into what else is global, but the internet, interwebs is all there, and who's a major internet player but Mark Zuckerberg, and what agenda might he have in this governance thing, and tying all these things together as we do. I mean, every week I can't help but tie them together. Story comes on, another John Rappaport report. Again, I think it's important to see that there's nothing new under the sun in some regard to move the technocratic future forward on people's ideas. Again, these are just people's ideas that they run on. This is not necessarily good for you. It's just something they thought was their utopia imposed upon you. Mark Zuckerberg is running the Bucky Fuller agenda. Did you know that? Now, I've never really studied too much of Buckminster Fuller. Sound like a pretty sharp guy. Come up with the Buckyball name. Looking at C60 carbon. It's going to be something in the future. I'm pretty sure it's already being worked on as we speak. Graphene, folks. Or forms of it. So Buckminster Fuller apparently his thoughts are something that Zuckerberg. Boy, do I want to say a lot of other words for that, but they will not do that behind the woodshed. We try to maintain a little bit of vocabulary insight. Wow. Bucky Fuller agenda. Every time somebody comes up with a universal plan to improve the world, you have to ask yourself this burning question. Who will impose the plan? And then you ask, what are the imposer's true motives? And you have to remember what a Trojan horse is. This is written by John Rappaport himself as a quote out of his book, The Underground. Over a period of 50 years, Buckminster Fuller explained his plan for making a better world. He talked about the coming wave of automation that would throw gigantic numbers of people out of work. He talked about the need for a universal system of support, whereby everybody on the planet would be guaranteed, from birth to the essentials of survival, food, clothing, shelter, and limitless free education. And I remind you that's the securities, right? The food security, housing security, education security, all these things. This is the UN agenda. You see, this is all constrained into one plan, and certainly Zuckerberg can be seen now to be speaking the words of those that spoke the words of that utopia. As it essentially put in a term, the technocrats. Read this statement by Fuller. Quote, we must do away with the absolutely specious notion that everybody has to earn a living. It is a fact today that 1 in 10,000 can make a technological breakthrough capable of supporting all the rest. Let me remind you, the producer does that when he makes your food. One farmer can feed dozens. The youth of today, not technocratically or technologically, he does it because he knows how to grow food on the land, and probably not many others around him do. At least not to his or hers expertise. The youth of today are absolutely right in recognizing this nonsense of earning a living. We keep inventing jobs because of this false idea that everybody has to be employed at some kind of drudgery, because according to the Malthusian Darwinian theory, he must justify his right to exist. So we have inspectors of inspectors and people making instruments for inspectors to inspect inspectors. The true business of people should be to go back to school and think about whatever it was they were thinking about when somebody came along and told them that they had to earn a living. Close quote. Obviously, Fuller's plan carries great appeal for many young people for whom the idea of earning a living is a full-bore horror movie. Fuller also believed that freeing up the youth to think about new solutions for humanity and come up with a new technology would justify his plans. And I emphasize solutions because we sued the Solutions Network as a treason and a felony against the people of the United States. These people all talk in the same language, and it harms us when applied. I'll end there. He goes on to explain how Mark Zuckerberg is embracing this with this in his statement here. Today, technology and automation are eliminating many jobs. Our generations will have to deal with tens of millions of jobs replaced by automation like self-driving cars and trucks. But we have the potential to do so much more together. All inclusive, right? Every generation expands its definition of equality. Previous generations fought for the vote and civil rights. But what I've told you about both of those too. Civil rights is right to pay exactions, extortions of every kind and no other, and voting is a franchise. He goes on to here, Zuckerberg goes on to say, from Facepalm, they had the New Deal and Great Society. Now it's our time to define a new social contract for our generation. Going on to say, we should, he says, have a society that measures progress, not by economic metrics, but like GDP, but by how many of us have a role we find meaningful. I'm pausing. I hope you hear these words that are inside the system of constraint, dispute resolution, where you don't have your voices taken. It's determined by others making alternatives to what you really want, and you're sold into that being the meaningful end outcome. Going on, we should explore ideas like universal basic income to give everyone a cushion to try to new things, and technology keeps changing, but we need to focus more on continuous education throughout our lives. Well, folks, that sounds pretty consistent. Just wanted you to know that there's nothing new under the sun on the technocratic agenda, of which sounds really good, and there are some parts of it that are as John points out, are truly something to go for. But they have this problem of the unintended consequence, and then who makes those decisions? It won't be you, and it's not. And I know that because you are not part of that plan, and you're not making your own. It's really simple what they're doing, and it can be found out. It doesn't take a lot of study any more than what a few people have already done that can already tell you, so you can jump on where you need to jump in and take care of what is going on. We're going to need everybody to do this, it seems to me. And I say that, I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people that really have an idea, that really understand that they're looking out for those that are harming us, and really need to know they have to stop us. They have to stop that which is coming against us, and it won't stop because they aren't going to stop. They got plans into 2100, folks. They're not stopping. And yet we can interfere with every one of those plans simply by learning that black and white and asserting it objectively. We don't need any emotion. We don't have to get in everybody's face. We don't have to go protest in the street. We just have to do the knowledge. We learn the knowledge enough to go find out who's doing the problem, approach those people and educate them, and either show that they're going to intend to be the criminal against everybody, or they're going to comport their decision making as it should be in the law. And what is that to do? To keep peace. If they make decisions that cause strife, that cannot be the source based in law or objective basis. That's the first thing I look for. When an answer comes in that creates more strife, I know it wasn't based in law if I'm dealing in objective things like, let's say, lands and soil title and those things. And you can too, folks. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope something I said will help you in moving forward. Very important cases to go and research at the Blogcaster. Remember, thank you very much for what you do on reallibertymedia.com and the archives and all that, and being available for that in case I couldn't make it today, which we did, so that should be all done. And freedomsnetwork.com. Social network, folks, jump in. Maybe use that as a tool to interact and get things done. And Jules over at UCY.tv, thank you very much for your podcast, your past cast, and that recast you do on Thursday. And we'll follow Ron Stevens. I haven't actually heard that out of his lips, so how he gets a PH to be a V, I don't know, but the Canuckistinians have their own way. Thank you again. I'll be here next week, tech dis, nature willing. Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
Well, that's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.